and it was interesting. We have some issues with blue-green algae, toxic algae here in upstate New York, and the Finger Lakes just started to recently become an issue. So it caught my eye. I'd love to hear a little bit about your work with it and how you guys are trying to work to solve the problem.
Great, sure. Yeah. So the press release that came out was related to a special issue that I published with some oceanographers on controlling light and climate change. So we know that with the changing climate, we're getting changes in light in our inland lakes and in our oceans. And so in lakes, I had two graduate students. One wrote a paper on how here in Missouri, at least in the reservoirs, we can see that light controls the production, primary productivity of algae. So how much oxygen they're producing to help with the carbon balance. And then I had another grad student do more of an applied research project. And so oftentimes when we're trying to mitigate harmful algal blooms, we focus on controlling nutrients, specifically phosphorus and nitrogen. But in his case, and around here in these agricultural reservoirs, sometimes it's difficult to minimize how much nutrients are coming in. And so light is a kind of an unexplored area of controlling these harmful algal blooms. You've seen maybe in California, some shade balls have been added to drinking water reservoirs, or aqua shade is another kind of dye product that people will often add. And so this is another technique that we thought was more, naturally based, and that's using glacial rock flour. So kind of like the beautiful turquoise lakes in the Rocky Mountains, that fine particulate material can be added to make the water darker, which algae need light and nutrients to grow. And so if you turn off their lights, then potentially you can stop their growth and then stop their production of toxins. And so we found that it worked fairly well. We did it in these, tanks outside. And so by adding this glacial rock flour, we were able to reduce the amount of cyanobacteria, but it ended up being a little more expensive than we thought. But it's just one option of many to try to kind of mitigate these harmful algal blooms in this changing climate.
Very interesting. So I'm curious, if it darkens the water, wouldn't that mean the light is able to, I guess the water's able to absorb more light and more heat, and that would heat up the water, and that would kind of, because I know algal blooms like warm waters, wouldn't that kind of negate that effect?
It wasn't enough to heat up the water. We only ran the experiments for 9 days, so it wasn't, a long term in that regard. But certainly just the counteraction, I guess, between light and temperature, they're both important for algal growth. And so, yes, you don't want to increase the temperature, but if you can cut out the light, then I think that maybe has more of an impact than increasing temperatures on algal growth.
Yeah, I know this, it's a constant balance between trying to mitigate by just reducing amount of phosphorus going into the source, I guess, versus this solution. Have you guys tried it in the natural world, I guess, outside of testing, in these tanks?
No, we haven't. That was the plan. We were going to do a whole lake experiment and add it to a pond around here, but it ended up being so costly that on an assistant professor's grant, we were unable to do that kind of experiment. We were surprised how quickly it fell out of the water column. So we added it and it disappeared within kind of 12 hours. So we didn't think it was feasible on a large scale like that. But that usually it's an advised next step for these type of experiments, is to try them on whole lakes.
Right, and yes. So, where did you guys get the material that is so expensive?
We just bought it commercially. So we just, Googled glacial rock flour, and there's a company that gets it from some Marines in the Western Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and so they usually sell it to gardeners, etc., as kind of a fertilizer. Though it doesn't actually contain a lot of phosphorus. We did measure that to make sure we weren't adding phosphorus with changing the light, and it didn't seem to be the case. But that is how it's marketed and sold, and so we just ordered bags of it. We did the experiment at the Kansas Biological Survey in Kansas, so had it all shipped there.
Interesting. Yeah. So maybe a future application of putting it in there when you have three 90-degree days in a row and there's a lot of sun, kind of thing. Like, I guess what's the future? Do you think for this?
Typically, we see blooms happening at the end of the summer. And so August, September, when things start calming down as well, blooms also like really stable waters. And so things that are not too windy or turbulent. And so, knowing when and where you expect to see the bloom and then kind of reacting to that with this. It did take effect within 24 hours. So it could be kind of a quick response. We saw, the blooms in Toledo, Ohio, in the case of Lake Erie, and that system is just too large to do anything like this on. The water currents would just take it away. So it can only be really applied to kind of small drinking water reservoirs or small contained systems.
Interesting. Okay. Are there any other, I guess, future? I know you kind of mentioned you want to, test this out in the natural world, so to speak. But is there any other, future plans that you guys have for combating algal blooms?
I think one of the things we're looking at is the role of light. And so a lot of our land use practices are to reduce erosion, which is great. And that also cuts out the nutrients. But in some cases, it also makes the water clearer. And so maybe that's not an overall net good thing. Maybe having a little bit of that dirt and turbidity in the water could help control blooms in terms of light control.
Yes. So when people think light control or they see light control, they think of, solar panels that are going above our heads that are darkening the sky. That's not what you guys are thinking at all, right?
No, underwater light.
Okay.
So after it reaches the surface of the water, how much is getting down into the water column where the algae live?
Right, because I know that word geoengineering is kind of a hot word right now. But would you guys put yourself in that category, or are you guys trying to go more of like a natural path?
Well, this definitely falls in the geoengineering category. I mean, we're manually adding something to lakes to change the environment. And so that definitely would be falling into that category, yes. But we're
Right.
hoping that by not adding a dye or something that this, because we know glacial lakes are natural and they function well and have good fish populations, et cetera, that this would be a non-invasive, non-toxic approach.
Cool. Okay, great. I think that's all I have. Is there anything else you might want to add?
I just think that in the future, with changing climate, we're going to have more of these harmful algal blooms. They're going to occur more often in more places and potentially be more toxic. So it's important that we come up with some creative solutions to be able to solve this problem.